Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our weekend edition of Hebrew Word Study. This lesson today was actually recommended or the question was posed by one of our listeners. And so we're going to take a look at the verse that they had brought up to me and just take a look at it. It's a very interesting one. Looking at your screen right now, you'll see we are in the book of Proverbs, chapter 26. And particularly, we want to look at verse 10. But before we do that, I think it's good just to set a baseline. One of the main things about studying the Bible, especially with Hebrew, is trying to get the context of who's being spoken to, what's the topic, um, who is speaking, what's the moral of the story, if you will, what's the outcome. Trying to get that first of all in our minds, because with um, the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew Aramaic Bible, the main thing we want to look at is the context, because what we find in the Hebrew language is not a scientific language. It's not like Greek is. It's not like English is, where it's very precise. Remember, there are only about 7,500 words in classical Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and so words can have many different meanings, which is drives English speakers kind of crazy, because we want a precise, here's what it means. We want a yes, we want to know, we want the right answer. We want to know definitively, what the meaning is. And that's how we are kind of culture driven here in our Western culture with our, um, you know, just the way everything is brought about and how English works. English has, close to 2 million words. So there's this precise word for a precise feeling and meaning, and it can be covered very closely. So understanding that there are only 7,500 words that are used in the biblical text, it's challenging for the translators. It's challenging for us as we study. And so that's where the context really drives the meaning of the word. And it's one of the things we learn as we study other languages, not just Hebrew, but many other languages, is that there are words that do not translate. There are words in Spanish. I claim to speak some Spanish, and there are words that you cannot find a single English word that is a plug and play and has the same equivalent in English as it does in Spanish. And so that's what's really helpful about learning another language, learning another culture, is it really helps us um, identify and be more sensitive and more compassionate towards others who speak different languages, who come from different cultures, and we get a broader view, and it then funnels into the study of the scriptures, because remember, these were written by people who didn't live in the United States, who did not speak English. This is Middle Eastern, Hebrew, Aramaic culture, and then add in 3,000 years prior to where we live today and what we know today. And we struggle. I really struggle. We all struggle to try to understand what they were thinking and what was going on and how the culture affected them and how their lifestyle and their education and their background and their limited amount of language, how it matters here. So that was a long preface and introduction to what we're going to go into. But as we look at Proverbs chapter 26, there's a word that shows up very often through here. We see the word fool in verse 1. We see the word fool in verse 3, fool in verse 4, fool in verse 5, fool in verse 6. 7 has fool, 8 has fool, 9 has fool, 10 has fool, 11. So you get the drift here. It's talking about someone that's deemed a fool. Okay. Now, fool today in our 21st century may not mean the same thing as the word did back when this was written, over 3,000 years ago. So that is another key consideration is what kind of person are they talking about? I think we can get a generalization, and again, this isn't the context of this lesson is to identify this word fool, but to look at verse 10. So we get an understanding this is being written to someone who's got some problems, who's not maybe living the way they should, who's making mistakes, who's tripping up and habitually got a life that is in need of desperate help. And so this proverb is trying to point out these things that this person, when they do these things, they're going to have some consequences that come about them. So with that mindset, let's take a look at verse 26. And it says, "The great God that formed all things both rewardeth the fool and rewardeth transgressors." This is the King James version. It's the one that prompted this discussion. It's the one that everybody's got probably the greatest familiarity with. So from that point, we're going to take a look into the Hebrew Scriptures. And so what we see here is verse 26 and 10. Of course, those of you who have been following the study are familiar with, the Hebrew being in the black letters, the phonetics in the blue above it. The number above it is a hyperlink to a dictionary or lexicon, so you can look the word up. And then underneath here in the blue are the parts of speech, which are key to help us understand the intensity and the direction of the language. And then, of course, the red is um, the typical translations. And you're going to see right here that there are words in brackets. And the words in brackets mean that the word was put in by the translators so that it could make sense. Remembering again that Hebrew is a language of very few words, and so some things are implied. And this is where you're going to see this implication really comes out in this verse. And so, what caused the issue here is um, there are many translations that look different. And so, the beauty here with Bible Hub is we can go and click parallel, and it gives us all the translations. And you look at the New International Version. Okay, well, let's start here with the King James basically said, what we just read, but the New King James Version did update it a little bit, still has great God, but formed everything and talks about hire and wages rather than rewards. So we understand that. But look at some of these other translations. They use the word like an archer who wounds everyone. So it is one who hires a fool or hires those who pass by. This is what prompted our listener to ask me what's going on here, because the wording in the different translations are very, very different. You see archer coming up here, you see employer. Well, how do you get from great God to like an archer? So let's just scroll down a little bit, look at these other translations. It has archer, like a careless archer. Um, Here the Aramaic is interesting. Here it uses the flesh of the fool suffers much, and the drunkard crosses the sea. Um, you get to see the picture here that there's some very, very different understandings. The JPS Tanakh 1917 is the Jewish Bible, and it is somewhat similar to the King James in that it was written, quite a while ago, over 100 years ago, or translated, excuse me, as a master performeth all things, but he that stoppeth is a fool, as is one that stoppeth a flood. So, wow, many, many different things. And of course, what we know is that there are at least 100, maybe 150 English translations of the Bible alone. And that should tell us something that um, scholars who come up with these translations feel the need to because they feel that the previous translations did not effectually bring out what the Hebrew, we'll just say Hebrew right here, is trying to mean. Again, who's right, who's wrong? They all right. They all have some measure of understanding depending upon what your background is, depending upon what your um, religious beliefs are, your education, your cultural background all play into translation. And of course, that drives us English speakers all crazy. We want word for word. We want to know what it means. We don't want any ambiguousness to it. And we want to understand it. Uh, I'm sorry. I struggled with this as I was learning Hebrew, and I finally have gotten to the point where it is what it is. We have what we have, but we do have the blessed ability to study. And this is maybe the way God intended it for us to, if it bothers us enough, well, let's get our Bibles out. Let's get all the study resources out that we can, and let's not let it rest until we come to a understanding within our spirit through prayer, through seeking God's direction, through all the tools that we are so blessed to have today. And that's what the answer is. And it may be different for you than it is for me. And I know that's really tough to get through because we don't, that just goes against us. But to a Jewish person, to a Middle Eastern person, this is Bible study. This is normal. There's a saying that goes, it's very common to have two Jewish scholars and three opinions, and there's other jokes that go along with it of that they can all be right and still, take away different things from it. For Middle Eastern people, this is how they grew up on their Bible. This is how Jewish people grew up on their Bible. They know that it's not going to be clear, and they're okay with it because the purpose is to build a relationship with God. The purpose is to draw closer to Him and to use maybe isn't the right word, but to allow the verses to guide our lives and change our behavior and draw us nearer to God. And we want this to be a relationship building exercise. And that's how I feel I have learned the most from studying the Hebrew language is this is a relationship building exercise. This is the love letters that God has allowed us to have in whatever form, in whatever, method they were given. It doesn't matter. We have what we have, and I want to use what we have, what I have the ability to study, and use it for the express purpose of drawing near unto God and sharing it with others so that they can do the same. So, again, lots of words there. Let's go and look at this verse 10. We see that the first word is Rav, which really means great. Doesn't it, we assume it has a definite article on it, but of course God is in parentheses. But when you read the whole thing, who else can it be who formed everything? Well, okay, that makes sense that it's God. But what is this word form? Where are they getting some of these other translations from and some of these other words? This word that's translated as form is hul, which is to whirl, to dance, has many different ways of being used here, as you can scroll down and see all of these different words. Um, Again, Hebrew covers a lot of territory. And so in the creation, of course, God took what was there and whirled it, created order out of chaos. Um, doesn't say specifically in Genesis that it whirled, but here's what the writer of Proverbs is making reference to, that God form that God took and moves things, if you will. And this has it's a PL form, which means it's quite intensive. It's factative, means that it is matter of fact. It's got a mem preposition front, which is translated as who, but it could be translated as from. It's also a participle, which means it has an ing ending. If it was truly translated into English, it would be forming, and the great is forming because God is still working. God is still active in all of creation. So this power, this that is translated here or ascribed to God is in everything and moving everything, whirling everything around. And then comes to this word for higher. It's got the vav in front, which is the word and sokar or sakar means to hire. Okay, that's pretty standard there. No discussion there. But and then it has the word for Kasil, which is translated as fool. Of course, the translators had many wonderful, colorful words to choose from. Fool was probably the kindest word that they could use here because, again, there's some pretty harsh ones here that fit under that translation also. And then you'll see here that this word is used again, sacher. Um, they, in English, it's very common for the translators do not want to replicate words. So here they used hire, and here the next one they use wages because it just makes the English sentence sound better. In Hebrew, when you see two words that are the same, it is intended to give emphasis, especially if they're right next to each other. So this would stand out much more vividly in Hebrew because the word is the same. Wages, wages. And so then we get to this last word here that is overeem. It's translated as transgressor, but it's really the word of avar, which means to pass over. So, I mean, that's quite something how they got transgressor. But again, looking at the context, what are they talking about? They're talking about this foolish person, and they're talking about what if were to apply the word avar, avarim, um, and to pass over good things pass over a person who does bad things like foolish person and the wages of sin is death. We're very familiar with that verse, and so we know that you another cliche we use, you reap what you sow. This is kind of wrapped up in a summary of you reap what you sow, and talking about that a person who sows in a negative way, in a bad way, in a foolish way, good things will pass over him. The wages that are meant to be good here will pass over him and not apply to him, and that the things that were coming his way would be the result of his bad decisions. Even though God has formed everything, and the intention here, I believe, is to um, advise that God makes things good and God provides these good things. A person who does foolish things, all these good things will pass over them, which is, I believe, the overeem passing over him. So again, that's my understanding from the Hebrew words. Notice you didn't see that in any of the translations that were up there. And it is what it is. And but yet I can come to a good understanding of this verse and feel like I get the meaning of it. I feel like I have something to apply to my life, to not be this Kasil, not to be this fool, because all God's goodness and the great things that He has formed will pass over me or will be lost to me if I choose that pathway. So, hope you enjoyed this study. God bless you, and hope it encourages you to just get in there and study God's Word. And we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.